accidentally, it came out in conversation that she had been abused as a child and that she kept the light on so she could feel safe. It's 2012, and I'm sitting down with a wonderful young lady named Melissa. She is there with bags under her eyes. She's rail thin. She's there with a baby stroller pushing her 10-month-old kid back and forth as we're having this conversation. And in my infinite wisdom, I've gone from being this imposter of a coach to, at that period of time, knowing quite a bit about quite a few things. You could even say I'm a know-it-all when it comes to these factors surrounding training. In my intellect and insight, I recognize, this is such an embarrassing story. I recognize that this person that I'm talking to needs sleep. And I say to her, ma'am, you really should think about getting 8 hours of sleep. I laugh at that because it was right before I became a parent. So I had no context of how unrealistic it was for me to say that to her. She shortly after quit. She shortly after was like, hey, I can't do this anymore. And I'm convinced that it was my fault. And I share that with you because the discrepancy is that what I was telling her is totally backed by research. What I was telling her was true. But that would be like someone coming to you and saying that they want to get strong, and you telling them, well, you need to squat 400 pounds. In that context, you'd be like, oh, thanks, man. Thanks a lot. That's what I need to do. It's so obvious, but in these practices and these behaviors surrounding fitness, it's like we've forgotten that there's something beyond research. We've forgotten that we're dealing with human beings. We've forgotten that it's not really the intended outcome that we need to be so attached to. It's the process, it's the skill, it's the ritual, and it's the practice of what you do in order to get there. I'm Spencer. This is the Behavior and Performance Research Podcast, where we delve into the art of radical health and athlete design. And today, we're bringing you a mini episode, just me, just a monologue, just a soliloquy on sleep. Much like strength training, the methods are many, but the principles are few. I'm going to do less to sit here and preach like I did to Melissa 10 plus years ago on what research says, or to overwhelm you with all of these things that you should be doing. And we're going to change this sentence to the following. Instead of you should be getting 8+ hours of sleep, we're going to change that to you could be getting 8 hours of sleep. And we're going to change that to you can improve the possibility of you getting better sleep by implementing this framework. And whereas I'm convinced, coaching for 20 plus years, that not everybody can get 8 hours of sleep, there's some things that are outside of their control, I am no less convinced that every person can improve their ability to recover. They can improve the skills, the practices, and the rituals around sleep that does in fact have an impact on the rest of their life. So we're going to get away from the should statements, and we're going to get into what I think is a pretty straightforward framework of how we might start to experiment. I think that's a good way to say it. So when we talk about sleep, in my mind, there's 4 areas that you can start to be creative with, you can start to experiment with. The first one is the lead up. We've talked in previous podcasts where there's something called revenge bedtime procrastination. That's where, in short, your day is so gnarly that by the time it is bedtime, your body, and we could say this is biologically, we could say this is psychologically, is not ready for you to close your eyes. You have not created enough margin to relax before you actually sleep. So I think the first area to experiment with is what's happening all throughout your day. From the second you wake up, what are some of the choices that you're making that by the time you're transitioning to that relaxation before bed, what are some things that you could potentially tweak there? Some ideas are not that you have to go on a vacation, but some really basic practices. Things that as I say this, you're going to be like, oh, for real, dude? Like that's the advice, but it's no less true. Things like, what has your activity level been throughout the day? Did you prioritize being outside? Did you prioritize exercise? What was your nutrition like? These are huge buckets of information that you can start to make tiny little tweaks to potentially end at the commencement of your day in a better place to transition to sleep. It goes without saying, but I'll just go ahead and say it, since that's what this podcast is that you do have to plan ahead. So if you're arriving at the end of your day and you find that you're spending 4.5 hours watching some stupid shit on TV, it means that you didn't plan ahead for what's happening at the end of your day. Now, I'm not here saying that you have complete control or autonomy over everything that happens. You more than likely have a job. You have responsibilities. You have other people that are somehow going to dictate what happens with your day, but you're not a complete robot here, and you're not a slave. So there are these 5-minute transitions between the roles and responsibilities that you have where you could have a reprieve. Instead of being constantly stimulated, you can shut your phone down. You can go for a walk. You can get 20 minutes where you're moving blood around. You can take 120 seconds and do some diaphragmatic breathing. I'm not going to get into the different methods. Just know that this is an area that you do need to investigate. Everything throughout the day leading up to you transitioning to this recovery mode. Number 2, it's the space of relaxation before bed. You've had your whole day. You know that bedtime is coming. There is this window that you need to experiment with in terms of duration and in terms of the quality of the activities that you'll participate in that allows you to feel relaxation. These are signals to your body that you have successfully made it through another day, that you're okay, that you'll make it through the night, and that all is good in the world. There's lots of ways to go about experimenting with that. You could do a quick Google search on ways to relax before bed, and things that will come up are create a cup of herb tea, sit with a loved one, take a warm bath, read some stimulating literature, and so on and so forth. But there's this huge category of things that are very individualistic that you need to determine is right for you or your client, that you know just signals like, hey, I'm good. I'm chilling out right now. It means nothing for me to share the things that work for me, but I can tell you that some of the things that would be relaxing for someone else don't do it for me. I don't want to take a cold shower before bed, even though that's what the research and pop science is telling you should do. That doesn't do it for me. Also, herb tea, not a fan. But you want me to fall asleep? Best thing you can do is just give me a book to read. That immediately signals like, hey, I'm good. I'm reading something for fun. There's no reason that I need to get worked up about this. So anyways, that space to relax before bed is an area that you do need to experiment with. And a lot of it's just trial and error. Number 3, it's transitioning to rest. And you say, well, what's the difference between this space to relax before bed and actually transitioning? Well, there's time to go on what I call like a mental walkabout. It's where you're not really mentally engaging in anything, but then there's this signal to your body that you are trying to go to sleep. That's all these protocols around switching from a sympathetic nervous response to a parasympathetic nervous response. So this is literally the things that are happening right before you go to sleep. Now, research tells us that we need to decrease light. We need to decrease the temperature. We need to decrease stimulation in all forms and fashion. We need to do things that do allow our body, like potentially deep breathing, to happen. But this is different than relaxation because there's still some stimulation that's happening. So an easy example is, for lots of us, we may decide that watching something on Netflix is very relaxing, but that wouldn't be a very good strategy to transition to resting because there is still stimulation there. Another example is, hey, you're in the living room, there's lights on, that's where you're hanging out with loved ones, somebody's playing the guitar, it's great, easy, relaxing conversation. And then you transition to the bedroom where the lights, stimulation, and volume is significantly different. Number 4 is you've made it through that transition, and now it's actually time to rest. And there's a lot of different factors surrounding the environment that you're resting in that you need to tweak and you need to play around with. Number 1, as we've mentioned a few times already, is the lighting. Research says that there shouldn't be any lighting. It's a great study done years ago where they put the size of a pin top of blue light on someone's skin, upper thigh, through UCLA, and it showed that they were never able to achieve deep REM. Are you going to be quizzed on that at some point in time? No, but it's important to realize that there is a certain amount of light that research shows is probably better, and that's none. And so you need to do some experimenting there. Second is the temperature. That's going to be very different for each person. If you've ever slept in a bed with someone, if you're married or have a partner, you realize that you two are drastically different in almost every single way, notwithstanding the temperature that you would prefer the room to be at. Number 3 is noise. There's a lot of good data to support white noise or some type of noise, an ambient sound that basically masks disruptive noise. And then last but not least is the tactile environment. And that's a cute way of saying, man, what's the optimal coverage? What should you be wearing? Again, there's a lot of individual differences there. But what works for one person could be a death sentence for another. And so be careful if you're making recommendations there, not from a source of bias or from a source of abstract research. So that's 1 through 4, the lead up, the space to relax, the transition to resting, and the environment that you're actually resting in. And as we've said several times, that it takes some creativity, it takes some experimentation. What you have to do from there is don't change everything. You change everything, you're not going to know what works. Yes, there's some sound logic that a few of these things that we've said, it stands to reason that they would be good protocols, they would be good modifications. But this is something that needs to be done with great patience and not all at once. So as you're having these conversations with yourself or with your client, pick the easiest thing. That's what you start with. Don't pick the hardest thing there. This thing that they've done for the last 20 years, don't eradicate that. Pick something that's a small pivot from what they're already doing, and then get some feedback. The feedback looks like one of a few easy questions that they can ask themselves. Hey, what's the difference in energy as you made this little tweak? What's the difference in your desire to train and your desire to be active? Did it improve that? Did it not? Do you notice no difference at all? Or do you notice like, hey, you're actually waking up and you have the energy and the excitement to go do this thing physically? For those that are dealing with chronic pain or even just low-level inflammation, hey, what's the difference as you change this ritual or this routine? Is there any effect on that? And then lastly, what's the general mood? Nothing to do with exercise or motivation, but hey, what kind of person do you feel like you're showing up now that we've tweaked this just a little bit? The ultimate question is this tactic making sleep better? You do need some time under tension to know the answer to that. So you can't just do this for 1 or 2 days and say, well, yeah, it didn't really work. Like, you got to give it some time. You have to give it a few weeks of doing this consistently to see if it made any impact. But ultimately, the answer to that question allows you to know, should you dig a little bit deeper or should you try something else? Another great question along this line of reasoning is, what does the data show? And I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a difference between sometimes what we feel and then what's really happening. One example, alcohol. Alcohol makes you sleepy. There's no doubt about that. And so conventionalism would tell you, hey, if you had a nice glass of wine, man, that's really gonna help you relax. It's really gonna fall into line with one of these things that we're talking about. But if you look at the science, you realize that there's stimulation that's happening as well. There's part of our brain called the reticular activating system that is stimulated from ethanol. If you've ever worn a fitness tracker, HRV has completely poo-pooed on alcohol consumption because everybody's HRV score is terrible by a teaspoon drop of alcohol in some way. And so there's enough data there to overwhelmingly encourage us not to do something that from an experiential standpoint feels like a good protocol. If I could give you one through line for this episode, is that your client's experience trumps everything. Your client's ability to improve their recovery determines if the method you're using is worth anything or not. Back to that story at the beginning, I was such a know-it-all. I had gone from, one-dimensionally coaching performance to really deep diving. It's one of my only skills, going down these rabbit holes of information download. And I thought that at some point my job as a coach was to just grace everyone's presence with my knowledge and bestow upon them all of the research that I had done. But that example with Melissa said that out of context, that information means jack. It doesn't do any good if you're not considering the fact that people are complex, that there's certain things that they can't control. Telling somebody to get 8 hours of sleep when they have 2 kids under 2 that are waking up 3 or 4 times a night is the dumbest thing on earth that you could possibly say. But then stepping back and figuring out, like, hey, what works for you? What do we have control over? What are some things that we could tweak and investigate is not as fast of a process. It's not going to leave you feeling as successful as a coach, but it is how human beings work. And so ultimately their experience trumps everything. I know that you're not supposed to have stimulation before bed, But we've experimented over the years and found that for this particular individual, listening to an audiobook as they go to sleep was really beneficial for them. So who cares what the research says? That's their protocol. There's people that, for lots of different reasons, need to watch something before they go to bed. I know that the light and sound stimulation is not good for them, but yet it does improve their recovery. So we do it. Some people need a cold shower. Some people need a warm bath. Some people need conversation. Some people need to not talk to anybody. There's lots of variation here, and the research at this point doesn't matter. It's the practicality of it. Now, I got one more story before we close, but before we get there, I want you to know that if you're listening to this, we are doing more and more remote coaching. We're doing this because we found that for a lot of people, as we're talking in this episode, they need to lead with behavior. They need to lead with lifestyle coaching. And by prioritizing that, it allows performance, it allows aesthetics, it allows changes in body composition to happen a lot easier. That's a pretty novel concept. If you're in Dallas, hey, maybe you'll be able to stop by and have a conversation with us. But if you're not in Dallas, I want you to know that we're having more and more of these conversations, and we're helping more and more people remotely. If that's something that piques your interest, we have free conversations all the time. And obviously, we're not opposed to that. We like talking about this stuff. If that is you, wherever this podcast is available, there'll be a link that you can go to our website, and all you do is schedule a free consult. We have a call over the phone, and then from there, if it's a good fit, we could talk about actually getting you to be one of these remote clients that we're helping and we're changing their lives. So back to the story. There was a client, and I won't say her name, but the one thing, and this was in that period where it's like, I know the research, you got to do what I say. The one thing that she wouldn't do is turn all lights off at night. It became apparent that she was keeping a big light on next to her bed. It's a grown adult. And for months, and thankfully, I'm so thankful for this, for months, she resisted. She, almost like this quiet rebellion, never verbalized anything, but just wouldn't do what I asked. And accidentally, this wasn't anything that I had the wisdom to know how to do at the time. Accidentally, it came out in conversation that she had been abused as a child, and that she kept the light on so she could feel safe. I should have told this story before we did this. And that was a really important moment for me, because you realize that people aren't robots. People are messy. People are complicated. And for her, the best way to relax, the best way to feel safe, even though she had worked through the trauma, even though she had been in counseling, was to keep that freaking light on at night. And so I think the moral of that story is to not forget that this thing we're doing, this coaching process, is not in isolation. People are a wildly complex system. They have stories. They require creativity. They require flexibility. They require you violating what the research says to make something work for them. So do whatever it takes. Be smart. Consult the data. But don't ever forget that something as seemingly as simple as turning a light off may be a huge ask and may not be the thing that you need to do. Thank you for listening.